Cyberwork and Infosec would like to introduce you to our new Cybersecurity Beginner Immersive Boot Camps. They're designed to help you gain and enhance your expertise in the cybersecurity field. Join our live interactive virtual classes led by Infosec's highly skilled instructors who will guide you through the material and provide real-time support. And as part of Infosec's immersive training, each student will have access to career coaching aimed at helping them start or switch to the cybersecurity field. You heard that right. We aren't here to just teach you the concept of what a security professional does. We want to prepare you to enter the job market with a competitive edge in 6 months' time. Now, I've told you about Infosec certification boot camps, and if you're trying to hit your next career target and need a certification to do it, that's still your best bet. But if you're an entry-level cybersecurity professional or want to be, or you're switching your career and want to experience a career transformation, Infosec's immersive boot camps are designed to make you job ready in 6 months. To learn more, go to infosecinstitute.com/cyberwork, all one word, CYBERWRK, and learn more about this exciting new way to immerse yourself in learning with Infosec. Now, let's begin the show. Today on Cyberwork, I'm pleased to welcome David Lee, the Identity Jedi. David is a force in the identity access management area of security and a force for good in his work, creating awareness and action plans to bring more diverse workforces to cybersecurity. David goes all the way back to his days taking apart and putting together computers, tells how his first major IAM job out of college was literally dropped in his lap, and we talk about all the whys and the ways to hire more diversely, the unspoken financial costs of even applying for tech jobs, and David provides tons of resources and concrete examples of how to get started in identity access management and how to make the cybersecurity industry a more welcoming, equitable, and agile place in the future. This is a full hour of insight, so keep it here for today's episode of Cyberwork. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Cyberwork podcast. My guests are a cross-section of cybersecurity industry thought leaders, and our goal is to help you learn about cybersecurity trends and how those trends affect the work of Infosec professionals, as well as leaving you with tips and advice for breaking in or moving up the ladder in the cybersecurity industry. My guest today, David Lee, transitioned from software engineering to becoming a harbinger of change and inclusivity in the tech world. With over 2 decades of experience, he has left his mark on government agencies, Fortune 500 companies, and numerous fields specializing in identity and access management. Recognizing that for technology to truly transform the world, it must embrace diversity, David serves as an agent of transformation, inspiring individuals to unlock their full potential. His influential voice and actionable insights have solidified his reputation as a respected figure in the ever-evolving tech landscape. When he speaks, people listen. He is, in short, the Identity Jedi. Thank you very much for joining me today, David Lee, and welcome to Cyberwork.
Hey, thanks for having me, Chris, man. I'm excited to be here.
Great. I'm excited to have you. To give our listeners a little introduction here as to what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about all of your different facets. We're going to talk about identity and access management, and we're going to talk about your incredible work in helping to bring diversity to the cybersecurity industry, which has not always been great with that. So right. let's get it started here. So I always like to get to know you a little better, our guests. So what was your first interest in computers and technology and cybersecurity? What was the initial spark? Was it in class? Did you learn it on your own? Did you have a family computer or something else?
Yeah, so it started when I was younger. I want to say it's about, as you get older, you remember the exact age, but it was all like 10 or 11, right? My stepdad used to always build computers, and he always had like the latest kind of computer, and he always had like the coolest games on it, right? So I would go and like play like all these kind of like, little like shooter games and stuff like that or whatever. And so I loved like being on his computer, right? And he taught me like, how to load up the games and stuff like that. And so then one day he was working on building it. And dude, it was just so fascinating to me, right? To see like, where the motherboard went. And at the time, right, this was when everything was color coded, right? So this is like early 90s. And I was just fascinated. And he's like, okay, like clearly this is something you like. So then he takes me to Fry's. So for all of my West Coast people, right, Fry's was like the Walmart of electronics. This was like the Disneyland for nerds everywhere. And so I walked in there and I was just like, oh my God, like everything was in there. And I was like, this is amazing. So I was like, wait a minute. So we can just literally walk up and down these aisles and here's everything you need to build a computer. So I was kind of hooked from that point on, right? I never had a as software started to go and the internet started to progress, like I didn't have like a fear of the computer. They were just interesting to me, right? I'd already seen how they worked on the back end. So then I would just kind of mess around with, software programs and figure stuff out. Like wasn't a hacker by any sense, right? I won't even, I won't even hold you and say anything like that. Like, but I was just interested in it. And so then when I was getting ready to graduate high school, I had, two kind of passions, right? I was either going to go for law school or computer science, right? And so I really loved to debate. I really loved research, writing. So I was like, okay, being a lawyer seems like, the thing to do. And then I saw like how long law school was. And I was like, nope, I'm going to go do this computer science thing. So I didn't really learn how to program until I got to college. And after that, I was just hooked. Last thing I'll say is the cybersecurity aspect came as I was learning, probably my junior year.
Okay.
We started to talk about like security and different things. And we started to learn like truly what like hacking was. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? I saw it as a big game of like, how do you basically get a how do you get a program to do something that it's not intended to do? Or how do you reverse engineer from the outside? Like, oh, this person, Stack Overflow was like the first one that I kind of found. It's like, oh, this person didn't expect this much data to come through. Therefore, now I can send in this command. Like, I just thought that whole thing was interesting. So
yeah. It all made sense to you. Yeah, I was going to say I'm also curious because we have a lot of guests on here who talk about breaking things and putting them back together. And I mean, you have a stepfather who is very knowledgeable about this stuff. So there's I think you could probably be very you could really go in on it and not worry that it's not going to come back together. Like
right.
There's that backup. I mean, did you ever like break? Did you in taking one of these apart, either like software wise or tech wise, did you ever like break it so bad that it was like, Dad, help or whatever?
No,
it all made sense to you. Yeah.
No, it kind of all made sense to me. I think for me, I feel like I grew up like right at the perfect time learning this because, like I said, a lot of stuff was color coded. So it's like, hey, like when you break down, except for the actual circuits, they put in the motherboard, like he did that stuff or whatever. But then like, okay, now I got to hook up like the different components, and this is dating myself back when we had like the RGB components, stuff like that. But on the back of the computer, all the ports were color coded. So it's like if it's a pink circle on the back, then you take the pink cord and put it. So it was it was like, okay, you just follow the colors and stuff like that. So and I would. Most of my tinkering would become like when we would be like loading up the operating system and stuff like that. And so I would try to commit. And again, it was nothing that, to your point, like I was lucky in that aspect of like, if I borked anything up too bad, like he's just like, okay, well, whatever, like he can go back and refix it. But I never did anything too crazy to where I was like, hey, this thing doesn't turn on anymore. Like, what do I do? So, I think I was lucky in that regard.
No, that's great. Well, but also, I think people who have that sort of lifelong comfort with it really does help later on in terms of not feeling like you're sort of have been left behind or whatnot. So, So I mean, I want to talk about your work here. I mean, it shouldn't be a huge surprise given your name. You're the Identity Jedi. It's right there behind you. But a whole bunch of your past jobs have revolved around identity and identity access management, which is a topic I love. We've had a couple of guests on here talk about it, but one of the things I like talking about IAM is that when I talk to people trying to find their way in security, I mean, it's not really a role that immediately jumps to mind when you compare it with traditional career paths. It's not a SOC analyst. It's not a pen tester. You're not working help desk. These days, even GRC, I think, is more popular. IAM, it sets you up for so many different career and skill progressions and paths, though. I mean, and it sets you really up for any number of like pivot jumps that you can make in your career. I mean, you can really go a lot of different directions. So I want to learn about what hooked you on identity and access management originally. Was it a job role you actively sought, or was it a move you made while working elsewhere, like when you were a software developer for ITUS? Because I see IAM architecture going at least as far back as 2006. So
So I got bait and switched, right? Okay. So this is not something that I actively sought out. It was. And it's funny you bring up ITUS. So like that's exactly kind of when this started. And for those of you, so I was a Beltway bandit for those of you that don't know that term, right? I started my career out doing contract work for the federal government. So, Lockheed Martin, SAIC, all those things or whatever. So I worked for all the government agencies back then. That was my first job out of college. And at the time, ITUS was a small contract, contractor to the federal government. And there was a program called ITUS. So that was really always confusing. But I applied for this Java software J2EE developer position. I was like, oh, great. Yes, right. Because I came out comp sci, right? Java developer. Like, I was like, I'm going to be the best Java developer ever. My career path is I'm going to end up being a CTO. Like, I'm going to be the smartest engineer in the room. That was my thing. So I
Yeah.
was like, okay, I wanted to get a mid to senior level J2E, J2EE developer role, and I applied for one. And so I was like, hey, I got it. Started on the contract, and I was like, I'm ready. And they said, hey, we're going to be building like this, access request system. We're going to be, building an interface to allow people to request access, all these things. I was like, dude, this sounds amazing. Like, this sounds like a great program to go and build, right? I was just excited
Right.
to go and build an architecture program. So I get in there first week, and the senior architect walks in, and he drops these 3 big manuals on my desk, right? Sun Identity Manager, never heard of it. Drops them on my desk and goes, welcome, kid. This is the system we're using. I'm going on vacation for 2 weeks. By the time I get back, I need you to have a demo set up. Oh, by the way, we need to be in production in 6 months. Good luck. And walks out. And I'm like, what the? What? Oh, okay. So I started flipping through these manuals, and I'm like, well, I'm not building a system. The system's already built. Like, I don't need to. And so I start, installing this Sun Identity Manager and figure out what this thing does. And the way my mind works, and it's I'm big picture first and then come back down, right? I need to understand like how something fits in to the greater puzzle. I'm one of those typical, kids. I always took things apart. Like, and once I understood, like, and I took it apart, I'm like, oh, well, this wheel goes over here, connects to this, and here's the pulley system, like, stuff like that or whatever, right? So I just start debugging the heck out of this freaking product, right? Like, it had a debugger. I would get it up and running. I would click on a page, and I would go to debugger, and I would just walk through the lines of code, understanding what things were doing, what calls is it making, how does it bring back this information? Oh, it's calling this, it's doing this, it's doing this. And so I spent the next, I don't know, 2-3 months, right? Just debugging the heck out of Sun IDM. And then I understood what it was doing. But then the bigger thing when I started researching is like, but why is it doing these things? What is a directory? What is identity management? And what is it trying to do? And so that just dove me down a rabbit hole. And I'm a person that loves to learn. I love challenges. I love new puzzles. And this was just one big puzzle to me. And then once I understood what identity management was, then I understood what access management was. And then I understood what this thing was trying to do. Now I was like, oh, so we're trying to manage how people request access, and we have things like policies, and we need to manage access at a very specific level. I was working for the federal government to where they had different levels of clearance, right? So we had scenarios where, let's say you're my boss, Chris, but I'm read into different levels of access than you. So you have to approve my access, but you can't actually know what you're approving because you don't have the clearances. I do, but you still have to approve it, right?
Yeah.
So like, I just found that fascinating. So that's what dove me into identity and access management, right? I dug in, I got really good at Sun IDM. And then the rest is kind of history, right? We got it deployed at the end of the year. Then I became one of the go-to people that everybody was asking, how do you do this? How do you do this? They finally sent us to training. We go to training, and like the first day, the trainer, like, I'm started asking all these questions. He's like, okay, you stop asking questions. I'm going to deal with you after class. You're scaring everybody else, because I had like debugged this thing. So I'm asking all these like deep level questions. Everybody else in the class,
right
like,
up here.
And so, I ended up, and that's just, it was history from there, right? I just, from contract to contract, I got really good at that. And then now I'm understanding all of identity and access management. And 20 years later, here I am still doing the same thing. So
love that. Well, I feel like there's 2 reactions. Like if someone, the average person listening to this, they drop these books on your desk and say, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. You're on your own. I think a certain personality is like, great, and then you put your hands together and you get into it. And I think other people would just faint because, the idea of not having anyone to ask questions to. But I think that's really, it's interesting how methodological, you said you start from, I need to understand the system, and then I need to go line by line, and then I got to see why the failures are happening and so forth. And I guess I want to ask you about that because you said it was your first job out of college. So, on one hand, my, a knee-jerk reaction as someone who is, works for a cybersecurity training company and stuff is like, well, you just did that without formal education. On the other hand, you did have formal education. So I'm curious about what your computer science training, if you feel like learning that on a higher ed level was sort of very helpful in terms of figuring out the sort of IAM troubles as well. Did it set the framework in your mind?
It definitely was for me. And I've had this conversation so many times with younger people trying to get into into tech or cybersecurity. And I tell them it's different now, right? Like, I mean, I graduated in 2003. I don't even calculate how long ago that was, because it's going to make me feel bad about myself. But, it was a different time. But for me, and also like the personality, how I'm built. So computer science helped me because I literally learned the theory of computing. And so I understand how computers work, understand how languages are compiled. I know what's going on, and I'm very comfortable with that. So therefore, you can throw any computing language at me and I can figure it out, because I'm like, okay, well, I know at the end of the day, like it needs to be able to do these fundamental things, right? Like I know the theory of how it needs to compute and get it, and you give a computer instructions and what it goes through. So now I just got to learn syntax, right? And that's all like different languages are. I was like, okay, well, this, what objects are available and object-oriented program, all this stuff, whatever. So where it helped me was understanding the, software applications that we were using. Right. And that's, again, like I said, with Sun IDM, I spent all my time in a debugger because I'm like, okay, this I know. Like I didn't know identity and access management, but I know computing, I know software.
Yes.
Right. So I know that this thing is sending across these commands and wants to go. Now I know the commands and instructions to send the software to do the things I wanted to do. And so that gave me that comfortability is not a word, but to be able to be comfortable doing that. And I can kind of apply that to anything. And so to that aspect, I could break down like technical things fairly quickly because I just kind of had that background of it. And then I would say, so that helped me in the beginning, but but probably like mid-career in my identity and access management career, what helped me more was really picking up like the soft skills, understanding, once I understood everything with identity and access management, understanding communication, project management, right? How to break down and manage what these big concepts were and explain it to non-technical folks, because what I started learning was in identity. Most of the time we're taking all these things and these backend systems and we're talking to these administrators and they're telling us how the process is actually create the accounts and set the permissions. But then the direct users are business folks, right? They're non-tech. They don't understand any of that. And they more often than not are driving the requirements of what needs to be there. And they're the ones that need to use it. So if those two are disconnected, like, right, you're not going to get kind of the job done. So what I really started to hone in on was my ability to both be able to talk technical and talk business, right? And then and be that bridge between the two. So to kind of wrap it up, I would say it's two parts, right? So it helped me, computer science helped me from understanding the technical aspects of any software program and what was being created to manage this stuff. And that kind of gave me a leg up, but I don't think it's a huge leg up to where nobody could, you don't have to have that degree to go do that. You just have to have a technical acumen. But then the other side of it was like developing those kind of softer skills that they say, like, better communication, project management, right? Understanding how to align business values and really explaining what we were doing and the importance of it to the business. So your skills will get you through that first project, but then the soft skills are what get you through a career of those types of projects and so forth. Absolutely.
And what it makes me think of, and this is maybe, this is certainly a lot lower level, but in terms of what your degree did with regards to solving, because you described it as puzzle solving. I also like playing like puzzle solving games and so forth. I feel like it's, sometimes you're playing a puzzle game and like, the user interface is so bad that you're like, well, I'm not solving these puzzles because I don't know what you want from me, and then once you start going, oh, I see, I have to click over there and I got to do this thing, and you didn't let me know that at the beginning. So I feel like you get the leg up by sort of understanding intuitively like the UI of this whole thing, and then within that, then you can say, okay, now we can actually play the game, so to speak, right?
Right. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the preparations and studies that would prepare new professionals. Like you said, you talk to people who are trying to get in this, and it's totally different now. But can you talk about? We'll talk soft skills in a second because you did just that. But can you talk about like what hard skills are required? Is it the usual kind of computer networking security trio, or is it something that can be done well by people with a less tech intensive background? It sounds like you really kind of need to know all of it, programming and the whole thing.
Yeah. So it's. And I hate giving this answer, but it is really the truth. It depends on where you're trying to go, like with the career, right? Sure. So, but I'll say this to the average person that's like, I've got a lot of people that want to break in. I tell them first do this, right? You won't go wrong like studying some of the stuff from the CISSP. I am not a CISSP zealot. I don't get me started. I'll get on a whole different rant about that thing. I don't knock anybody that's got it. That's great. But it covers a lot of the domains. So I tell people like start there, cover the different domains of just cybersecurity in general. Figure out what resonates with you, right? You do at least want to understand like the different domains and where this fits in from an identity and access management standpoint. Then I say, okay, Now let's start learning technologies where they are and where they fit, right? I always draw this. I'll explain like identity and access management. IAM is actually like 3 or 4 different like subdomains underneath there, right? There's identity management, there's access management, there's governance, right? There's privilege access management, right? So start to understand what those things are. And unfortunately, it's confusing in IAM because we call the tools the same thing as the actual like domain. I was like, but understand the domains separate of the tools. Now that you have that, right? And you can go and kind of research that on the internet. Once you have that, now again, like what really resonates with you, and you go, hey man, I really like this whole access management thing, and single sign on and set that up. Great. Now let's go learn the technologies, right? Now learn the technology, and those are the hard skills, right? Go learn. It's now Entra, right? Entra SSO, Okta, right? There's a bunch of new ones coming out there now beyond IAM, like beyond identity, but so there's all these kind of like SSO tools. Go learn that, right? I tell people now, like it's unfortunately it's not as big as it used to be, but like I loved when ForgeRock had like all their open source products, and you can still go find them, right? But now you can go install your own identity and access management infrastructure. You can get a directory, you can get an SSO, you can get a governance product, right? Go install those, learn those, understand like how these tools work, right? But you've already understand the domains, why they work in that place. And then now we can start to kind of figure out and kind of plot your career and where you want to go from there. The other side of it, I say, but there's also like this need for like the kind of business analyst side, right? Okay. Understanding what identity means in the organization. So that's where I would tell people is if you start with the CISSP, like understand all the stuff around policy, around GRC, right? Because a lot of that stuff will apply to an IAM level where it's like, how do you go about like creating these policies, and what do these policies need to be? How do you need to configure these tools, right? What's right for the business? How do you handle something like Sarbanes-Oxley, right? PCI 4.0, which is introducing a lot of stuff around identity, right? NYFDS, which is the new New York compliance. It's allowing that's forcing companies to do things, right? So like there's this whole policy management understanding of it too, right? So I tell people like you don't have to necessarily be tech because people struggle understanding this, right? All this is needed for identity, right? And I'm biased, right? Because it's been my career and I love it. Like identity is so interesting because it truly does sit in the middle between business and technical, right? And so you have to kind of like understand all these things, not as much as cybersecurity. Like you can truly be technical in cybersecurity and be fine. Like you can just go learn how to pen test and just be a pen tester, right? Never give a crap about policy, never, because you don't have to explain anything to anybody. It's like, oh, I'm going to go do a pen test. I'm red teaming. I'm doing all these things or whatever. Identity, not so much, right? You do need to kind of have to have that understanding of the business to kind of help not only promote the program, but like make sure that things are being done successfully.
And I ask that specifically for that reason, because I think, a lot of our listeners want to get in, don't necessarily have the sort of heavy red teaming, pen testing, either skill or impulse, and think, well, surely that can't be the only way in. And I think I just want to sort of clarify as well. It sounds like, especially if you're working for a large company, you're not going to necessarily, if you're in IAM, you're not going to be having to necessarily handle every aspect of that, right? Like you said, you're going to be working on the governance possibly, or the actual access management or whatnot. Is this a sort of thing where a larger company might have a team and then sort of different people doing different things within it?
Yeah. So the larger organizations, what you usually see is there's an access. Well, okay, I'll break it down. There's an identity team, right? Okay. Yeah. And that team is composed of like usually the access management team. So they manage the directory. So this is your Entra IDs or your Active Directory, and they manage the access management side, your single sign-on. So they usually have like the Oktas and stuff of the world. Then you kind of have your privilege access management team, which is your CyberArks or Beyond Trust. They're managing like all your privilege, so all your admin accounts. So think about your root accounts on a Linux box, your domain admin accounts on your Active Directory boxes, excuse me. So you have that team. And then there's the governance team, which is handling your, you see this like what your cell points, your Zillas, your Conductor Ones, where they're doing the access requests and the governance, the request and provisioning, managing the user lifecycle management, right? Okay. So when a new user starts, where do they go? So it's usually separated between those three, on bigger companies, those three teams on an identity team. The smaller you go in company, right? The more all that comes down to like one or two teams. You're the guy. Or in some cases, you're the guy or the girl that's doing all of that, right?
All of it, right. Okay. So if you want to be that person, by all means, there's people that will be glad to hire you, but you don't, I want to make people aware that you don't have to be, Atlas and carry like the entire burden. Like you're almost certainly going to be focusing. I mean, unless you are working for a mom and pop, like you're almost certainly going to be focusing on one aspect of this large field or another. Is that right?
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, so you mentioned the sort of distinctions, and this, I apologize if this is kind of overly sort of philosophical question or whatever, but can you talk about the difference between identity and identity within access management? Because I have colleagues and people on who have been on the show who are in the sort of like the deep inquiry of identity, and it feels like I'm talking to people like floating on the top of a mountain, cross-legged, like there's this sort of philosophical, like, what is identity? I mean, can you talk about can you sort of like, can you break that down or whatever? Like, there are identity people and then there are identity people, so like what is the study of identity look like as separated from identity and access management?
Okay, so man, what's the best way to draw this line? So,
Okay.
all right, when I refer to and when I think of identity and access management, we're mostly talking the administration and governance around digital identities,
Yes,
within a workforce or on the consumer side, right? And I'll come back to that separation in a second. But mostly you're talking about how do I administer and govern these digital identities, the creation of that digital identity, the attributes that they get assigned, the applications that they interact with, right? And so how do I make sure that these accounts and the entitlements that are associated with those accounts are managed in a way that at any given time, I know who has access to what, right? So when to make it simple for listeners, when you hear IAM, think who has access to what. That's what that's doing, either for the workforce or for the consumer. There's, on the more philosophical side of just like, identity, right? And people can kind of go different places with that. But the way I look at it, there is a bigger conversation around like, what does it mean to kind of have and own your identity in this digital realm of today's world, right? Because we have, the last 20 years, we just kind of exploded with everything online. We kind of made a lot of assumptions in the beginning because I'm going to be very honest, it was a lot of us nerds who were creating this stuff and we lived and breathed this stuff. And then all of a sudden, like we didn't expect when the internet was first created, we were sending scientific documents to each other. Like nobody, that was exactly. HTML. Like, and so all this stuff kind of built on top of it. And so we look up and we build web commerce and e-commerce and social media. And then we get all these things. And we never truly took a step and said like, hey, what does this mean? How do you represent yourself online and how do you protect that information? And so those are discussions that are happening, that it's in the realm of identity, but it's identity in itself. I hate to say it, but it's kind of siloed, right? There's some of us who work within a workforce and then a consumer, we're dealing with this stuff. And then there's people when you get into like decentralized identity and what that means. And like, how do you turn around and make sure that everybody has access to these things that are going in like the digital wallets and phones and things like that, which I'm very much in tune to and having conversations around, because it for me, it was kind of a thing that I was like, okay, like, yeah, I get that. But I was so entrenched in what's going on like in businesses and we weren't using it in everyday life yet. But not to give Apple all the credit, but I've kind of made the joke sometimes that like Apple's kind of like the biggest identity player in the world that nobody's ever heard of. Like from an identity perspective, I was like, because when you think of like what the ecosystem that they've created, like I've got my iPhone, it's got my Apple Wallet, I've got my Face Mac, ID, like everything kind of logs in, and with Face ID, I can log in, I can make payments, all these things or whatever. Like it's to the point that I can leave my house with just my iPhone.
Yes. Right.
I'm in a state of Georgia, 100%. So I have like Georgia, digital ID. It's not accepted everywhere, but the point is like, I have it. Like I can at any given time, like show you and verify these things. Right. And so we're now to the point where that aspect of it, of like, what is a digital identity? What does it mean to be an identity online is more and more of a question, because we use this stuff every day and we're putting it in more and more places. And so there's lots of discussions. I just came from Identiverse last week and we've got entire tracks on this discussion of what we're building, how we're doing this on this technology. It is time for us to start, sorry, fellow nerds, right? We got to step out of the shadows a little bit and have these conversations, because we're building these things over in a vacuum and we're giving them the services to people who they still think all this stuff is magic.
Yeah,
right? Like we understand
right.
it's ones and zeros, but the average person is like, no, it's just magic. I click into something happens. So, sorry, I don't want to go too far.
Oh no, that's fine.
I
just have one more thing I want to ask about that. So you do sort of have feet in both worlds. It sounds like. Is it sort of, this is another sort of abstract metaphor, but we see like those couture fashion shows, and you're like, look at that crazy stuff people are wearing, and then 5 years later, that's sort of trickling down, influencing what your average streetwear is and things like that. Is it something like that where there's these big identity ideas happening in these almost kind of think tanks, and then it's sort of trickling down into IAM and the way people sort of do business day to day? Is that what I'm?
Yeah, absolutely. And I use Apple. I've used this analogy before. I use Apple Face ID and Touch ID as a perfect example. So when Apple first released Touch ID, God, I used to have the dates memorized. I don't know what they are. So I'm going to screw these dates up, guys. So when you're listening to this, just Google it, but just relative, I'm just going to pick a date. Whatever it is, let's say it was 2003, whatever. Okay. They came out with Touch ID. 2 years later, they came up with Face ID, right? It moved super, super fast. And Touch ID, that was the first time we had ever massively had any kind of biometric sensor on a device. Yes. Right. And we were just like, oh my God, this is what is this? I can,
what's going on here? Yeah.
right. And it so quickly became into the masses that now it came to Face ID. And now it's just, you don't even think about it. Right. It's just, you're using biometric, scan data and up until that point, this was sci-fi stuff, man, that we would see in movies. And so, yes, these things are happening, decisions are making, and you're seeing it trickle down, but also Moore's law is coming into play, right? So it is happening so fast. As soon as we get one thing, you see that the next adaptation of it that much quicker. And so what we're seeing around on that digital identity space is, the way we authenticate and verify. Anybody that I travel a lot. So if you've traveled, TSA and Clear and the digital ID, they're taking photos now to verify. This stuff is getting more and more into the everyday. And I think over the next 5 years, it's going to get accelerated. Yeah. And it's one of those things that, to your point, the think tank, and these are good ideas, which is probably about 7 years ago. Now, it's infiltrated into the community while everybody uses it. And the next time it's not going to be 7 years, it's going to be 3 years, right? Because it's going to happen that much faster. So it's definitely something that, we need to hone in on. We need to make sure that we are, watching and not only watching, but getting involved on how some of these things are happening, checking some of these vendors and things that they're creating. There is a big discrepancy when it comes to a lot of these data learning algorithms and AI algorithms when it comes to people of color, right? Again, won't go on a tangent. Right. I've talked about this before, but
we'll get to it.
Yeah, I mean, these are things that are important because now we're dealing with technology that has the ability to impact a mass amount of people, right? And where accidents now are, whether intentional or non-intentional, right? They have real damage, right? It's not just, oops, you can't log in. Now it's all of a sudden somebody can't verify themselves. They can't get access to services because
all sorts of things shut down. Yeah. Absolutely. And again, just to sort of button up that last point there, I think, again, I'm always trying to sort of lower the barrier to entry with these regards, so when I talk to people about cryptography and careers in cryptography, there's a lot of careers in implementation of cryptography, but the idea that you're going to be one of the people writing the encryption, there's only a handful of people that are necessarily, that can be the thing you get to eventually, but it does, you don't have to, everyone says boil the ocean these days or whatever, but you can be deeply involved in identity without having to be one of the people pushing identity forward, and you can still have a very satisfying career.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Okay, well, good. Let's you brought us into the next topic of conversation here, and you did it. Partly you foregrounded it by talking about how tech people have been very sort of insular and have written things that make sense to them and don't make sense to common people. And I think there's a larger and more pernicious aspect of that today because we have here to talk about the remarkably low African American representation in the field of cybersecurity. So. One of the things we talk about on CyberWork all the time is the multifaceted benefits that come from making a strong, intentional decision to recruit and hire a diverse and inclusive workforce in cybersecurity. I have the things I've heard before around this topic, but I'll shut up and let you talk about this instead. So, can you elaborate on your statement here, which was, quote, creating a more racially inclusive workforce benefits everyone and is vital to better identify the technological risks and vulnerabilities. Tell me what that means to you.
Yeah, what that means to me is we've crossed the chasm of where tech and software can actually do human harm, right?
Yes.
I remember, studying about this when I was coming in college, and it was like, okay, yeah, but like we don't, we use software for accounting, for like, what I mean?
Right.
Like
Yes.
reports, like we didn't use technology to that standpoint. Now
Yes.
it's everywhere. Like it's in our cars, it's in our medical devices, it's in our homes.
Mm-hmm.
It's now, being integrated into access to services, right? So it very much has an impact on people's lives. And so, one of the things that we really got to get comfortable at talking about in this space is that, listen, the numbers are the numbers, right? Like tech in general,
Mm-hmm.
and then even down to cybersecurity is a white male driven field, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so this isn't to make anybody feel bad, but it's like if you've got a team that's developing something and say, I'll pick on Snapchat a little bit. Like they did this
Sure.
was years ago, right? When they first did their filters, right? It was a small team. They were testing all these filters, and they were like, "Hey, these filters work great," and they put it out there, right? The problem was people of melanated skin, the filters wouldn't work
Mm-hmm.
because Snapchat's test database was all white.
Yeah. It was, yeah.
So it was just one
Tolerated.
of those
Yeah.
things. Like they weren't
Mm-hmm.
trying to exclude anybody. They just it's like,
Never
oh
occurred to
crap.
them.
Like
Yeah.
it
Right.
never occurred to them because nobody in the room, none of the testing was like, they didn't have any of that test results. Then once they had the data, they fixed it. Right. And that's
Mm-hmm.
those sort of the things. And like that's kind of like the microcosm of what's happening. Like, and within tech, it's like you have all these teams that are trying to do and solve these problems and put out these services, but they don't have a diverse set of ideas. They don't have a diverse set of experiences. They don't know how this is
Mm-hmm.
going to work. Like they think of it their way, right? Like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
well, for instance, like we talked about in my history, like my stepdad was into computers, things like that or whatever. So like I'm around this stuff, like I have a comfortability with it. And so I think of it a certain way,
Right.
right? But and it's so crazy that it happens in cybersecurity, but what's the thing about cybersecurity? Our whole thing is we think differently, right? We try and look at something and go, but wait a minute, I know you're supposed to go down this way, but what if I do this, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what if
Yeah.
I hit this API and I send it this data instead? Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
what we thrive on that. We want ways to think differently. And it's like, I think the one area that we should be leaning into is cybersecurity, and we don't. And so what it means to me, like that when we're having these conversations and we're building these teams and we're having, communities that are not affected in this, like we're not hearing their voices, we're not getting their ideas, their perspectives, but also we're doing harm, right? We're going to put something out there that directly affects them because we just didn't think about it. Simple things is like you go to log into an application and say, put in first name, last name. And then we put in and we expect like American names or Anglo-Saxon names to have more than 3 characters. There's an entire culture that their last name is 2 characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go invalid login, can't log in.
Uh-huh.
You just told this person that their identity is invalid. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's just
Right.
you didn't, right? You assumed that this was the case. And I use these very simple examples that go like, we're making those, I don't want to call them mistakes, but we're making those snafus there, like we're making them everywhere else, right? And this is why now we need to be intentional about how we're building these teams, and that's the key word. When everybody asks me like, how do we fix this? It's like it's be intentional. Like, and I don't know why people act like it's rocket science. It's like, like Chris, right now, if you told me you're hungry, and I said, okay, what do you want to eat, Chris? He's like, pizza or a burger. You're like, I don't want pizza. I want a burger. What are you going to do? You're going to intentionally go and find a burger.
Yeah,
like,
right.
So I may bring you a salad. I may bring you a taco. I may bring you a burrito, but you're like, no. I want a burger. Like,
yes, exactly.
You're going to go find a burger. It's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So when I hear the excuses of, well, we're trying to hire more people, but we can't find them. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, you're not looking. Like, you're not going to go look. You're just saying, oh, I'm just going to take what's here. It's like, I really wanted a burger, but you gave me a salad, so I'll take a salad. That's fine. No.
Yeah.
Go find the burger, right? And they're out there. You just have to go find them.
Yeah, and well, I think that's worth amplifying a little bit, because you said that cybersecurity people, our brains are intrinsically built to find alternate methods and so forth. But there's also, I think, if you're of a certain disposition, there's also a stop point where you're like, okay, no, that's enough. I don't want to know too much about this or whatever, or I don't want to deal with that. One of the examples I always give from a disability perspective is one of my colleagues had to do a thing to identify herself where she had to simultaneously hold an ID next to her face and hold her camera, and they have arthritis, and it was like, I just about couldn't get the two things, and it was the only way in, and so it's another one of those things that you don't think about, until someone says, this doesn't work, and there's just once you start thinking in those terms, it just spiders out in every direction. Where and again, maybe this is a stretch, but we're so into like DevSecOps now. The idea of like thinking about security before we start the development, or thinking about it at the start of the thing.
Right.
And I think a lot of this, if you have a team who is diverse and is thinking about all these things, you're not having to do these emergency patches at the end. You're thinking all the way, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so you're hitting it. You're thinking about all of these ways that it's going to be more useful to a greater number of people. And like you said, it just is better for everybody that way.
Right. Simple things is like even your test group that you test them on, right? Or like, and but even beyond that, right? I mean, for those of you that have been on a team, right? Like when you're just a programming team, man, right? Like it always baffles me because like I don't program as much as I did anymore, right? Or as I used to, but I love programming, man. Yeah. And what I loved even more was like pair programming. And like getting on a team and like those hackathons, man, where it's like, it's like 3 or 4 of us and and I loved it because like the ideas start flowing. I'm building something this way. And you like, Chris, you'd be like, oh, like, hey, here's how I did this interface. And I use these classes. I'm like, oh, dude, that was dope. I never thought about it that way. Yeah. And you know what I mean? It's like, let's do this. And it's like, all that creativity just starts happening. And like, it doesn't, everybody just, they respond to, oh, we have too many people, not, too many cooks, not enough, blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, like, no, like, it's not going to slow things down. It just means you're going to have to be better at communicating and making decisions. But like, that's where like, I just wonder, like, how many, did you guys not have late night hackathons? Like, that's where like some of the best things happen.
That's
right?
where all the fun stuff happens. Yeah.
Right. And we're not saying we have to be perfect. Am I saying that, hey, if you have a more diverse team, you'll never make a mistake? No,
right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's life. Right. But like it to your point, it won't be like these emergency patches. It'll be like, oh, like we thought about this. Oh, but we didn't think about this case. Okay, well, let's bring that in. Right. You just it's more input, more data that you have to be able to create a stronger solution every time you put something out there. Right. Yeah. I'm a big, I'm an LA kid, right? I grew up, voting for the Lakers. I'm a big Kobe fan, right? Get 1% better every day. That's it. So if I have a chance to add something to my team that's going to make us 1% better, why would I not take that? Yeah. Right. And then we're all getting 1% better every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. So I want to talk from there about other sort of stats that are coming out that regard kind of workplace culture and so forth. So you noted that 20% of Black individuals face poverty and limitations in accessing IT courses and opportunities. Like you said, you had access to this stuff early on, and it's not always the case. And it's what's even more distressing to me is that you say, quote, 51% of Black adults lack the financial resources to apply for tech jobs. So, David, can you speak further to these roadblocks and where the shadow financial costs of applying for tech jobs are located that we might not be thinking of again? And also if there's ways to sort of break these financial barriers to application and employment barriers. Yeah.
So again, another thing that kind of makes people uncomfortable, right? But I always say, like, get comfortable being uncomfortable is, I think sometimes we look around and we assume that like, well, everybody's got access to internet, right? Everybody's got access to a phone. Like I got an iPhone 15, like whatever. That's a $1,200 phone, right? Now I've been in tech a long time. It's a very lucrative field, but like, it's not lost on me that $1,200, like that's somebody's mortgage payment, right? That might be 2 or 3 mortgage payments for some people. Like, so like the costs for some of this stuff, like we just don't think about it. We're so used to having access to internet and things like that or whatever. Yeah. There's a lot of people that don't. And the bigger aspect that faces like Black communities is there is a lot of communities close on the poverty line, so they don't have access to internet, right? Then it goes to their communities. They don't have libraries or public places where they can go get internet, free access to get internet, things like that. Some of the school systems aren't really set up for that. So I mean, this isn't just a one layer problem. There's a bunch of stuff in there, right? I don't take that lightly. There's a lot of things kind of to fix there. And so is there a silver bullet? No, there's a couple of different initiatives that have to be, put in place to fix some of these things. And so do I think it's all on the tech companies to fix that? No, but like, again, that's something you need to kind of take in consideration. But again, go out to where the people are, right? Yes. And do more, be more present in the communities, whether it's, high school events, HBCUs, right? There's HBCUs all across the country, right? Connecting with these kind of high school events, things like that. Do something, right? Instead of freaking spending, $90,000 at RSA for a booth, why don't you just go to a couple of high schools and, hey, how about we sponsor, freaking fast internet for the day. I don't know, bring some routers, whatever, like be creative again, be intentional about it to go do that. Right. There's areas to go and do that. And then, but specifically, for the Black community, it's, one of the things that two things, it's teaming with the local high schools and things to make sure that STEM is something that's taught. We've got to do a better job in the Black community of making sure that our kids are interested in it, right? Because that's another addition to the pipeline problem is like, we've got to get more people interested in it. And part of that is just having this discussion. Part of that is kind of helping from some of the tech companies to see and say what this looks like, right? Again, representation absolutely matters. I didn't really think about this until the last couple of years of like, how important it is for all of us to see ourselves in something else we're trying to be, right? If I asked you right now, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but like, hey, Chris, you want to go be a, Formula One driver, and you're like, okay, but I don't see another Formula One driver that looks anything like, that I can relate to at all, right? Like, it kind of subconscious, you're like, okay, I don't know if I can do that, but and the perfect example of this is, the 4 minute mile, right?
Yes.
For
I talk
years,
about that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was seemingly a physical impossibility for a long, long time.
Right. And then the amazing thing is if you look at the numbers and stats, like once it was broken, like we started humans started breaking it like over and over again. Why? Because we knew it was possible.
Yeah.
Right. We knew it was. It is possible. So that means what? That means what? Right. Because before it was like, oh, it's physically impossible. Like you will, like they pretty much like the body would shut down. Like you would die if you tried to do that.
Burst into
but then
flames,
you look at it and go. So now it's like when you're running and like your lungs are filled with air, you're like, well, I know I'm not going to die. Like, you know what I mean? Like. I already know that it is possible. Yeah. So now your brain just starts working on, so I just have to find a way to go get it there and done. It's the same thing, right? Like we've got to be able to see that like, oh, this is a career path. These are things that I can do. Yeah. And now I can kind of start working towards it. So, it's a multi, I'm going to nerd on you guys, right? It's a multi-body problem, kind of like the 3-body problem, right? But it's not impossible to solve like the 3-body problem is. But it's one of those things that there's multiple things that have to kind of take play. Like number one, like we need investment in STEM and I would say Black and brown communities, right? The fact of the matter is those education systems are sometimes subpar, right? We need investment. And so again, this is where tech can get involved. These big tech companies get involved and help with some of that investment. From the community perspective, hey, don't be afraid of STEM, right? Get your kids, in the engineering and mathematics. And sometimes some of the parents, they don't push it because, they weren't great at engineering and mathematics. So it's like, how am I going to help them, right?
Yes, exactly.
But, get them involved. There's tons of free resources now. Like when you can get them available to, internet, MIT has open sourced a bunch of their courses, but even before that, you get to, Google's got a lot of free courses out there. So, and then just YouTube, man, this generation, oh my gosh, man, like everything's available on YouTube, right? Like, so you can find people teaching these things on YouTube. And so there's effort there, but there's bigger things financially that we have to do to make sure that these communities kind of have the same access that we do. One of the things that I would, love to see is we have to start thinking about internet like utility, kind of like water. Like it needs to be a basic thing that everybody has access to. Like I love the city of Chattanooga, actually, in Tennessee, right? Like it is. Internet is provided by like water, like everything else, like it's a utility, right? And they've got set cost services that they deliver to make sure everybody in the city can have access to internet. I freaking love that, right?
Yeah, should not be hard, but you can literally count on a couple of hands the number of cities that, especially in this country, that have done that. I think if you go to Europe, you find a whole lot of examples of that. But and I don't understand why we're not yelling about that constantly, honestly, because that is such a barrier. I mean, and it is such a utility. That's exactly the right wording. So I want to go back. I want to go back to the burger here. This is a recurring discussion on the show. Like you said, companies with bad diversity hiring track records say just what you said. Well, we'd like to hire more diversely, but no people of color /women /LGBTQ people candidates applied. And of course, the follow-up question always has to be, do they know you exist? Have you told them that you want to hear from them? So I know we're not going to solve this in an hour, but I'd still like to document some concrete solutions that we could speak out, amplify, disseminate into the industry as a whole. Like, what are some initiatives and policy changes and intentional actions that you have to happen to bridge to the employment gap in cybersecurity of Black professionals?
Oh man. Okay. All right. Here you go.
Let's do it.
I got it. I got it. Woo. I got the list, man.
Good.
So number one. Okay, so number one, be intentional about where you're going to search for your candidates, right?
Yes.
I get that there's been a huge pool of now new employees. And so most employers can just sit back, everybody's going to apply. Okay, well, you've got to go be active. So number one, like, I don't care where you are in the country, like, start building a relationship with an HBCU. If you don't know how to build a relationship with the HBCU, you can reach out to me, hit me up on LinkedIn. I will gladly walk you right into North Carolina A&T, Aggie Pride, and connect you with who you need to get to. But there are HBCUs you can connect with, you can get to their campuses, you can do that, right? That's the first place that I would start. Number two, after that, you go, okay, you need to address your biases that you have in your hiring, because newsflash, you have them. You know why? Because we're all human. We all have biases. Stop getting sensitive about it. It's okay. But you need to address it and know what those are. You need to look at your hiring process and go, where could we possibly be putting bias in, right? Start making, real checks and balances to how you do that. Something very simple is, in the first screening process, take off the names. Just look at the experience, right? Only pull the names in when you've selected a candidate and go, yeah, this is the one I want. Now you pull the names in, because like it or not, we make judgments based off of names and background and experience, right? We do that. What I would take off name, I would take off college, because that's another thing that kind of people look at and they make judgments on. So get that out of there and then just look at the experience.
I mentioned address too, because you're sitting there going, well, I know enough people who have said, like, oh, well, it would just be too hard of a commute for them. It's probably best just not to even ask about it or whatever. Yeah.
There you go. I like that. Let's add that as well, right? Like, get to the point where you keep saying that, well, we hire the most experienced, then focus on that. Focus on the experience first. Now you've selected that candidate. Now you bring in the rest of the information. Because quite honestly, why do you need to know somebody's name or where they live or college they went to know whether or not they've got the experience to do the job, right? I get that they may come into a factor later, but don't do that in the beginning. Number three, actually check your again, back to bias, check your hiring managers. Like, what kind of culture are they building? Right. Yeah. Like, talk to your actual leaders within the system. And I know that this is, this means, hey, executives, yes, you actually have to talk to your senior leaders about, and understand what their thoughts are, what their biases are, and make sure that that's understood. The next thing after that, which is interesting, is take a hard look at, are you a place where somebody would want to come? Right. If I go to your About Us and I look at your leadership and I see basically the picture of a white man from 20s to 50s, and that's your entire leadership example, I'm going to look at that and go, I don't really know if this is a place where I want to be. Like, you can't. Now, I'm not knocking you for that. That's not. But like, you have to realize that, like, people outside looking in, they're going to look at that and go, I don't know if I fit there. When I go look at your website and I see pictures of your team or whatever, do I see anything of color or LGBTQ? Like, do I see anything that makes me feel like, am I going to be the only one there? Like, nobody wants to be there. It doesn't matter if you guys are the nicest people in the world and you support everything about that person. They don't know that from the outside looking in. So you're going to have to promote and show that you are a place. And if you're not, like, what if you're saying, well, Dave, we aren't this, but we're trying to, then be honest and say that, right? Like, but you're going to have to show that, like, yes, this is important to us, and we're creating a place like anybody wants to be welcome with open arms, right? Yeah. And they don't, like, nobody wants to feel like they're on the outside looking in, and they get in there and then it's like everything's different. Like, they're the person, like, it's back when we were in grade school, right? We're the kid that doesn't get the inside joke. Right. I moved around a lot. Right. So like, for those of you that didn't move around as a kid, like, it's like you move in and, like, everybody's got their inside jokes. They've got their, like, and you just feel like an outsider, right? Like, you're just waiting to integrate. Like, that happens. And so that's the things you have to combat. And again, all these things takes intent. I listed all these things, and people are probably saying, this seems like a lot of work. Yeah,
it's a lot of work. Yeah, it should be a lot of work. Yeah. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
Right.
Well, okay. Let's talk about the About Us page and the so forth. I do want to talk about any recommendations you have for not just bringing more Black cyber professionals into the industry, but also making sure that we have a strong plan to help them advance in the industry. Because you note that 77% of polled Black employees are not satisfied with their role in tech companies. 50% report suffering from racism in the tech industry. So, what are some of the big changes that can be made to change entrenched cultural biases, and also make it so that we have this deep bench that will that can sort of move up, move up through the corporate hierarchy, and not just, well, all of our, our whole SOC is diverse,
Yeah. So this is this is the hard one, man. This
Yeah.
is because this touches some
This
very
really requires you to knock some walls down. Yeah.
it does. And it touches some deeply, deeply flawed things that we have within our environment, which is that a lot of these leaders just don't care, right?
Yes.
A lot of these leaders have created a culture around what's comfortable to them. Most of these leaders have never interacted with a person of color in their life. And again, does it make them evil people? When I say this, that doesn't make you a bad person, right? But it's just the reality. And we build around our comfort. And so to increase some of these numbers, right? Again, a lot of these, let me say, I'm assuming that a lot of these people feel this way with these numbers that the Black employees aren't satisfied or experience racism because they're the only one. Right? That's literally like when I wrote my book, it's like the only one in the room. That's been my entire career.
Yes.
Right. Where it's like, I'm one of one, sometimes one of two, one of three. Right. And it's little things such as like, hey, like we all like to go play golf or do these things. I don't play golf. In this case, I do, but whatever it is, like, it's these little things. And again, it's not passing judgment on what other people like to do. It's just, you've got to be cognizant of the fact that I've got a different culture coming in.
Yes.
And so what can I do to make sure that they feel, and like interact with them on some of the, hey, like, what are some of the things you like to do? Right? Like, let's do some of those things. Like when we think about culture events as a company, let's include all of that. Right? Like, again, this one's it's touchy. It's hard because, people want to politicize and all this stuff, whatever. It's just about making another human being feel seen. That's honestly at the end of the day, that's it, man. Like, me and you can go hang out and we'll start figuring out like, Chris, you like different things than I like. But if we're friends and we're trying to establish a friendship, guess what that means, Chris? Sometimes I'm gonna come do the things that you want to do. And I'm going to find joy in doing that because I like hanging out with you and vice versa, right?
Absolutely.
All this means. So you want to create a culture to where these people don't feel like they feel like seen, like make sure they feel seen. And unfortunately, though, sometimes it goes back to that bias, right? And this is why I literally would drive a lot of the executive leaders, please, for the love, like invest in this bias training, understand that you have it. It is there. And it may be simple things. It's like, well, no, I approve based on merit. You may think you do, but you may find out that you don't, right? And it's these little things. Microaggressions is a big thing, right? There's little keywords that like Black people are triggered by. We have trauma based on, like, oh, like he speaks so well. Why would I not speak so well? Oh, she can be a little feisty or testy. It's like, oh, well, when John yells at the meeting, he's being a leader.
He's initiative.
When Sarah pushes back, she's being feisty, but we all know the term. I'm not going to say it here. I don't know. You're listening to your podcast, but we know the term that gets used, right? And so now she's labeled that, and you're like, I don't know if she'll make executive material, but John can go get drunk, right? Yell at you, and it's just it's John being John, right? There's a lot of that stuff that's how we fix that, but it's intent. We actually got to want to face it because here's the reality, Chris. A lot of these people, a lot of the toxic leaders that are there, but are also some of the most successful.
Exactly.
And so now, if I'm a CEO, I'm executive, I'm going, okay, this guy brings in a ton of money.
Yes.
But he's also probably one of the worst people for our culture. Now you have to make a choice. What do you care more about? Building a culture in a great company or making money?
Yeah. And your investors are like, great, I'm so glad that you lost money in the interest. You got to learn to tell those stories as well, because that's an important part of it. Like, but I think there's also, so much to be said about that level of systemic change that you are going to see it pay back. It might not be in one quarter or one fiscal year or whatever, but it's going to be there. So so I could talk to you all day. I mean, we're at the hour here, so I want to I just want to wrap this up a little bit. But one thing I like to always ask our guests, and I'll ask you right now, what's the best piece of career advice you ever received?
Man, I got this question. I was like, dude, it took me so long to come up with it, but I think it was, I'm going to go with, and I'll actually shout him out. So Mark McLean, CEO of Cellpoint. And I was leaving. I was getting ready to leave Cellpoint. We sat down. We talked about everything. But he said this. He goes, "Always make sure that you're running towards something and not running away from something."
Hmm.
And that stuck with me. And it has stuck with me ever since. So whenever I'm coming up with something or facing a decision, and I was like, I want to do something different, I ask myself, am I running to something or am I running away from something? And yeah, I really appreciate him sharing that. I mean, that's stuck with me the past about 7 years now.
That's great. I'm very excited that our listeners get to hear that. I think that's a great piece of advice. So, yeah, we're at a time. I want to send you on your way here, but before we go, I don't know which aspects of you that you want to talk about. I know that you have On the Corner Media, which is your podcast group. Your work as the Identity Jedi. Tell our listeners anything you want to tell them about yourself.
Yeah, I would say this, that the biggest thing is my website, iamdavidlee.com.
Okay.
It encompasses all of that. One of the things that I love to do, obviously, I love talking about cybersecurity, identity. I love talking about diversity and inclusion. Any way that I can be of service, that I can help, or if you want to get in touch about, maybe speaking at one of your events, just hit me up there. You can find everything there, my book, newsletter, all that stuff. So I made it easy for you,
Awesome.
all in one place.
Awesome. And they hopefully people can LinkedIn you as well if they want.
Absolutely.
Okay.
DMs are open.
We have very LinkedIn savvy listeners, so hopefully you'll get some user requests from there. Well, David Lee, thank you so much. This was an absolutely fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
And thank you to everyone who watches and listens and writes into the podcast with feedback. Keep doing that. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like to see on the show, drop them in the comments. Before we go, don't forget infosecinstitute.com/free is still where you can get a whole bunch of free and exclusive stuff for CyberWork listeners. There's our promo trailer for Work Bites, which is our great security awareness training video series in which a very strange office staffed by a pirate, a zombie, an alien, a fairy princess, a vampire, and others navigate their way through age-old struggles of yore, whether it's not clicking on the treasure map someone just emailed you, making sure your nocturnal vampiric accounting work at the hotel is VPN secured, or realizing that even if you have a face as recognizable as the office's terrifying IT guy Bone Slicer, you still can't buzz you in without your key card. So go to the site, check it out. I love it. I watch it all the time. Also, don't forget to check out our free cybersecurity talent development ebook. You'll find our in-depth training plans and strategies for the 12 most common security roles, including SOC analyst, penetration tester, cloud security engineer, information risk analyst, privacy management, secure coder, ICS professional, and lots more. Once again, that's infosecinstitute.com/free. Go check it out. So one last time, thank you so much to the Identity Jedi, David Lee, for joining me today. And thank you all for watching and listening. This is Chris Senko signing off, saying until next time, happy learning.